Laing. I'm the Chief Solution Officer here at Acunox. I sort of sit at the intersection of the business, the technology, working on a number of different aspects. I have been a security practitioner in the past. I've also founded a few security companies, including Red Seal Networks. And I'm excited to be here today with Ann Davidson. Ann, would you like to just give a brief overview on sort of your history, and then we'll get started?
Sure. I was born in a log cabin. Oh, that's too far back. No, we're not doing that. I was all of my cybersecurity background was at Oracle, and I had several jobs in security and development teams, and more recently was the chief security officer. And like a number of other people, I was RIF last year, which, kind of a bummer, but I had a good run and had a fabulous team and great support for management. So, nothing to complain about.
So, and I know you actually started as a mechanical engineer. You were a Navy officer, so thanks, for your service. And you started that shift into cybersecurity in the 90s, which is oddly enough the same time I was moving into sort of cyber. What sort of attracted to you to sort of making that shift and starting to focus more on the security aspects?
Oh, that's a great question. When I first joined Oracle, I was working on one of the accounting applications, payables, and to make a long story short, and I worked on, I think they were making government financials. Governments have a different way of doing accounting, and I got sort of ticked off at my then boss. No holding a grudge at this point, and I had been looking at this group called Secure Systems for quite a while. And it was just interesting because what they were building at the time was a version of the Oracle database that could handle classified information, meaning Ann's only cleared to see, secret information, not top secret with a, bunch of components. And the database would enforce that security model, which was really cool. And the day I started looking for other jobs, I thought, I really want to go work in that group. And they had an opening. And it was fabulous. It was so interesting. And that's when I started working in security. And one of the things that really intrigues me about it, I mean, part of it was I did have as a naval officer, obviously, I was concerned about, defense, which is primarily what that was built for. But also the interesting questions that were being asked that are still kind of public policy issues. For example, you have people who think, okay, encryption is not the only thing about security, but obviously it's a critical, functionality. But wouldn't it be nice if the law enforcement people could access, and decrypt it so they can catch bad guys? I'm looking at this and going, well, there's no way to make encryption, so only good guys should access it, because if you weaken it, you're weakening it for everybody. And yet we still have these public policy discussions. And then from there, I moved into, worked on the database. I ran product management for security functions. And I don't even remember why they made me the chief security officer, but my remit wasn't all of security, like incident management and all that, but it was focusing on how do we engineer security into all the products, because it's not just a feature function. It's, if you build something, you have to assume bad guys are going to attack it. So how do you think about that when you design it, you build it, you test for it, and you maintain it with a security mindset? And was a full-time job and a half. And of course I had, as I mentioned, I had a fabulous team. All due credit to them, many of them whom are still at Oracle, because without them, we wouldn't be able to build out such a good program.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that, because I have another friend of mine. He was in the Air Force, and he didn't do anything cyber, the Air Force, but he did sort of physical security, etc. And it's interesting. Now he's cyber, but he's also at a very large company, and he has actually started to help out with executive protection, and actually is focusing less of his time on the cyber. And it's interesting, sort of that, similar mindset. You've got to secure stuff. You've got to think about what the issues are, and it's, with physical side, it's like, oh, they're going to a trade show, or they're going on vacation, or whatnot. Much like, with security, it's like, oh, they're rolling out, a new application or a new technology. We're going to talk more about new technologies later in our chat, when we get into a little bit more around AI and everything. But as you sort of look at, sort of making that shift from thinking about, general security into software security, what were some of the lessons that you learned? And you just mentioned one, around the sort of, making good guys able to access the encrypted data. But, what are some of the other, like, just core tenets that you saw were different, and some that were the same when you look at sort of general security versus the software security?
Well, part of it, you'd asked me earlier about the, engineering background. Everybody in my family, my dad had a PhD in civil engineering, was a professor, and then the dean at the U.S. Naval Academy. And my sister and brother have civil engineering degrees. I had to be different. I had to be a mechanical engineering major. I have to say I'm not very mechanical, but the point of this is, and I've used this example a lot. Now, to be fair, engineering has physics, math, a lot of things that support it. So for example, thermodynamics, it's physics. But the core thing is engineering is a mindset. And I know this from not only from being an engineering major, but being in the Civil Engineer Corps in the Navy, where I did construction management. Why am I telling you all this? Think about this. No one says, and of course, the mantra of the tech sector, and I understand it to a point, is move fast and break things. Okay, but engineers, no civil engineer would say, let's get rid of the structural, the structural bracing in a building so we can get the house up faster. Let's skip the rebar and the concrete so we can get the house up faster. What's going to happen in California where you live if you do that? Seismic bracing is actually part of the building code. There's an earthquake and oopsie, my house went off the foundation and it collapsed. So that's the thing, there's still things that you need to observe so that the building is structurally sound. And that kind of mantra, and again, I work with brilliant, wonderful computer science majors, graduates, and data scientists, but security, from what I can tell, is really not part of what they learn in those programs. If they do, it's, I took a course in cryptography. And what's really critical is the security mindset. I've said for a long time, and I'm not the only one, if we don't change the mindset around that, we're never going to have enough defenders to defend what was not designed and engineered and built to be safe and secure.
Yeah.
And the other corollary to this is, I like to say, build safely so that you can move fast. For example, cars. Think about it. Cars. Totally, again, innovation that changed the world from everybody having to be in a wagon pulled by horses. And I say this living in a state in Idaho where that was part of the Oregon Trail and the California Trail where they split at Fort Hood. And cars made you go faster. This is great, but it's the seat belts, the airbags, the brakes, the little beeper that goes, hey, somebody's in your lane, you can't see. Those things are what help us drive quickly now. Those safety mechanisms help us drive quickly. So while I understand innovation, time to market, all those drivers about moving fast, I think if you design it safety and security into it, it is going to enable you to move more quickly. And more critically, in some of these new technologies, I think people will trust AI more if they see that security is part of it, and you have appropriate guardrails and all those things. I'm getting a little bit ahead, but I think those are the critical things. Safety, it has to be an ethos, and it isn't right now, and that's the problem.
Yeah, it's sort of, I love the building analogy, because it's like you really lack sort of that, I remodeled my house 5 years ago, and I know more about getting a permit inspected than I ever wanted to know. But, you have building requirements because I'm in California. You have to have shear planes, et cetera, to deal with stuff. But you also have to have the inspector to come out and say, yes, it is installed. And that is lacking in a lot of organizations that I have done consulting for or spoken to over the years. But one of the things I've seen is, some of that has been built up over time because, you've got to basically order a machine. It's got to go into a data center. That data center already has some layer of security wrapped around it. It's kind of like if you remodel your house, the likelihood you're going to do any long-term damage is a lot less remodeling, a living room than if you're doing a complete house remodel. But when people move to the cloud, now all of a sudden that perimeter that you have and all of that sort of layered defenses are not there. And yet the ethos of, sort of build security in from the start is not there. And the security team, it's the whole shadow IT, shadow AI, shadow cloud, whatever shadow word you want to attach to the end of that, has really sort of put the security guys further and further behind. In terms of an ethos, what are some of the things that you've seen in working with? Because as you said, the ethos goes beyond just the security team. What are some of the things that you saw that were successful at Oracle in getting other departments to realize security and actually partner with security, or at least not be an impediment to getting something secure?
Well, that's a great question. Well, there were a couple of things. First of all, organizationally at the time, when I got pulled out of development, I love being in the database team, but I understand why the company did this. So we had a corporate security organization, had a fantabulous boss. So physical security, kind of the IT security, and then our team were all in the same group, and we would feed off one another, particularly. So that was part of it, but also my team was relatively small. Now that was actually a good thing. Why was it a good thing? Now, if I went to my boss and said, I need to hire 800 people to look over the shoulders of all the developers as they're writing code, that's not the best use of resources. So we had people tag teamed in these groups. For example, like what we called them, a security lead would be kind of an architect level person in whatever the group was, building applications with a database or other things they were building. And then we have what we call SPOCs, not from Star Trek, security points of contact. So in smaller groups under the security lead, we would have designated people who implemented our program. And we had some training that everybody had to take. If you're a developer, right, you just have to know the basics of secure development. And we had specialized training, maybe focusing on different programming language. So we built this out. So we had a lot of people deputized. And that was expanded to include, hey, if we're building something internally just for our use, it's not even a product, they have to follow those requirements too. And consultants would go out and I'm modifying something for a customer or building something. You have to also have that security mindset. So having those people, designated individuals in those groups made a huge difference. And frankly, it was much more efficient because, seriously, would we ever be able to hire enough people to look over the shoulders of everybody writing code? That's just a waste of resources. If all you're doing is looking over their shoulder as opposed to embedding people in the organization that can, if you will, spread the gospel. And we also evolved the program. For example, hey, programming languages evolve. Development methods. In the olden days, hey, waterfall was everything. Well, then you had, you're going to the cloud and you have faster iterations, different development. So we became more agile, literally more agile. We had agile methodologies and moved to DevSecOps. So being able to adapt, and part of the adaptation, by the way, was also there was a fabulous, still exists, ethical hacking team. And I joke about it. I said, everything they learned about hacking, they didn't learn from me. They were really good at what they did. And the value of them wasn't just, oh, I found a bug, go fix it. It's what were the large lessons learned from what they did? Is it, and how can it be captured? Is it, do we need a different development standard or coding secure development standard? Do we need different tooling? Do we need different training based on what they learned? And some of the things they did were not only software, but hardware hacking, incredibly valuable in terms of finding something before the bad guys found it, and being able to lift the mindset and educational level and tooling level of a far larger group of people. So that's it. You got to assume somebody bad is going to do something bad. You better get on it yourself rather than waiting to find out the hard way. And that helped a lot.
Yeah,
so there were other things as well.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, you related, sort of that, build the security and build the ethos in from the beginning. Over the years, I've noticed, a lot of the early attacks that were more system as opposed to user targeted in the 90s, DNS, SMTP, a lot of the attacks that I saw in my practitioner side of my career were really down to that architecture. We architected DNS and SMTP, assuming the best intentions. Why would anybody do something as foolish as attack SMTP or DNS? So, it was built to be useful, which it was, but it didn't have those core things of assuming exploitation. And that's probably, to me, the biggest shift I have seen from the 90s, as you said, the waterfall, where you'd have a release every 6 months to a year or even more, to releases even multiple times a day, as you really had to shift from assuming best intentions to the opposite, and assuming there was going to be an exploit, and it was going to be an exploit almost immediately, even more emphasizing the need for that ethos of building security in from the start.
I have a funny story about that. And again, I'm not trying to diss the person involved because, hey, everybody makes mistakes, but it was, and by the way, I also credit the researcher community, because most of the researchers were very, they were ethical. Hey, we found a problem. They reported it. We had a process to make it easier for them to report things. And if they followed our rules, we would credit them in an advisory when we did put out a fix for it, because you want to thank people for that, right? They help make your product better. And so anyway, somebody reported something, and it was like Control X makes the stack fall over. So the developer comes back, great, I checked for Control X. I said, fabulous. Do you check for Control Y, Control Z, Control? Well, no. I said, whoever did this is going to be back next week telling you and withdrawing the other ones. Well, why would they do that? Well, okay, the real problem isn't Control X makes the stack fall over. The real problem is you didn't validate input properly.
Yeah.
And that's rule one of secure software development. Never trust unvalidated input, much less from an unvalidated source. Rule 2, see rule 1. And so anyway, that person hadn't thought about it that way. Yes, you just didn't validate input. It's not Control X is the problem. The problem is that you didn't kind of step back and say, what is the root cause here?
Yeah, so that ties into, one of my lessons learned is, again, when I was a consultant, most of my effort in hiring security is I'd let other people test the technical side, because I couldn't cover all the technical stuff. But what I found is their mindset was a bigger issue, because they could always direct somebody who knew the technology better to do something. But if you couldn't think like a bad guy, if you couldn't think he's going to be back tomorrow, to try Control Y, Control Z, you're not going to patch it correctly. You're not going, if they've broken in your network, you're not going to then look where they went next. When you had this broader team, did you see any signs of that where, it was, and you just gave a great example, but, other examples or things that you had to look for, hey, for the ethical hacking, we really need people with this mindset versus just looking for a technical skill set?
Yeah, and one of the things we did that I think was very effective, and again, when I say we, I'll do credit to my team. I am, you're only as good as the people willing to work with you and for you, and I'm very blessed to have had such talented people. And so one of the things was in cases where and we had a lot of automation around raising bugs, particularly with the advent of increased use of third-party software. There's a problem in the foo library, and you use it a lot of places. So we'd find automation to raise bugs where those things were used, which helps developers get on it faster. But the practice we had was if something was a CVSS 9, or I think maybe it was 7.5 or greater. I can't quite remember what the limit was, but someone had to get in front of my boss and explain, do basically a postmortem. Okay, when was this introduced into the code? What was the nature of it? What do we do not only to fix it, but to look for other instances of similar things, so that, again, bad guys probably build on their successes. So if you don't look around and say, what else, not just where else was this used, but, oh, there's another thing here, that same problem, let's go fix that too. So you had to go, explain what you did to try to systemically address it. And that's really important. Now, maybe you can't do that if something's a CVSS 2 or something, maybe that's not worth doing that. But for something that's higher level, you really should, okay, what's the takeaway from this? And what do I need to do to more broadly find it. And part of it was also be introducing testing to make sure it didn't get reintroduced. Right? Because stuff happens. People, oh shoot, I put something back in there and it shouldn't have been there, and now you just open the door again. So trying to make that more systemic. You were talking about ethos, and the example I would always use for people, which I'm sure some people think this is strange in the tech sector, but as a naval officer, I think I briefly thought about joining the Marine Corps, but I'm not sure I would have cut it as a Marine. But I totally respect them. And I said, the Marines have an ethos of every Marine a rifleman. Every Marine is lethal. They all go through the same training, don't care what you're going to do. No Marine would ever say, oh, excuse me, Mr. Bad Guy. I'm just the admin clerk. Go after the guy with the M4. That's the one you want to be attacking. Toodles, have a nice day, group hug. No, they're all lethal. And and you read about their history and they know who their heroes are. And I totally respect them. They are all warriors. And obviously, we're not going to be literally fighting in the hallways in these tech companies, at least you hope not. But it is that ethos of security that needs to be broader, because I just don't see how you can have enough defenders to defend what wasn't, as I said, designed and engineered and delivered with that in mind. It's you can't add it later. You can't add rebar after the concrete has set. And I don't think you can easily add security if you didn't think about it when you were building your system or designing it.
Yeah, and I'm seeing signs of that, along those lines of, you need sort of everybody to have that minimal viable ethos, because things are changing, they move too fast. You see, companies putting out, security awareness training, and that does help, but I'm also seeing signs of, and going to start to shift a little bit into talking about various aspects of AI now. There's a company called Lab One, for example, that does dark web monitoring, but instead of just grabbing credentials, they're actually applying AI to the files that have been taken and classifying the files, and showing how the files can be weaponized. And as I've talk to customers, because I advise them, and talk to a few other very big, global 10 brands, we saw signs of data being weaponized at a speed where it had to be AI. Like somebody couldn't steal the data and then be using that data for very targeted spear phishing attacks without the use of AI, to do that. And you've talked about, sort of AI being explainable. So would love to hear some of your thoughts around AI being explainable, but also how you see security changing as, think about your team at Oracle, how they could or should be using AI to improve or accelerate what they do versus what the attackers might be able to do with AI.
Well, that's a great question. So just only leaving security on the table for a moment. What you see in AI, or at least what I read, is a lot of people who, you read these studies that many companies have not seen the payoff for use of AI. In fact, it's a really high percentage haven't seen it. Now, does that mean I'm bashing AI? No. But it kind of gets back to, it is very powerful, has some good uses. And so just in general, again, if you want people to be successful using it, you should be honest about here's what it's good for and here's what it's not good for, noting, of course, that the technology evolves very quickly. So what you said last month may not be true now, but that will help you be successful, and then more people will want to adopt it. Now, back to the security thing. My team, and I claim zero credit for this, except trying to encourage people. This was early, I think a year ago, saying you should take a look at this AI and see if you think there's some really good uses we could put it to in what we do. So somebody did that. And what they did, I thought was really brilliant, and it kind of illustrates what's a good use of it. So the data set for secure development practices was our data set, right? So it wasn't like somebody put something in there and said, hey, don't bother running static analysis and to poison the data set. So, but occasionally, even with the training and the websites we had, some developer would say, well, I don't really understand this. Could you explain it to me? Or I'm trying to do Y. Could you help me here? So one of the things they did was say, we're going to take a chatbot and have it answer those questions, check it for hallucinations, right? To make sure it's not making something up. And I remember seeing a demo of this, and it worked really well. And what's the value of that? Well, first of all, the chatbot could generate an answer faster than one of the very brilliant employees could type out one. And that meant that those employees' time was freed up to do more higher value add things. To me, that's a great use of AI. It does something that's predictable and adds value. It can do it faster. Again, we controlled the data sets, and that frees up high talented employees to do something that adds more value. Just like, hey, I can add up numbers manually, but using a calculator does it faster, assuming I type the numbers in correctly. So I don't have to spend so much time adding things up manually, and I can go off and go Nordic skiing or do something else. So that to me is a good use of AI. In terms of the concerns over it, some of them aren't even just security related, but one of them would be hallucination. And I remember just hearing about how many the different hallucination rate could be really high. Now, don't you want an accurate answer? Don't you want to know if it's not an accurate answer? Wouldn't you like something to say, I don't really know? And particularly in the example I would use is you go to a doctor to get a diagnosis. What do you want to hear? Well, I'm sorry to tell you have cancer. You don't want to hear that, but we know you have cancer. We have a treatment plan. Okay. You don't have cancer. We're not sure we want to do more tests. What you don't want is for someone to make up an answer that could have grave consequences if it's not right or it's made up, and you find out later you had something very serious. That's not what you want. So that's one. Hallucinations. Cognitive decline is another one. Right? It's not just a security issue, but if you outsource your thinking to a machine, and they've for example, doctors who, there's a two-part to this. AI is good at analyzing X-rays to find something a doctor might have missed. Well, that's very promising, right? Wouldn't you like to know, hey, there's a little thing here, we need to investigate that. Good. But doctors who rely on AI to do that analysis are losing their cognitive skills to read X-rays.
Yeah.
So that's another thing. Again, this is just a general concern with AI. So back to the security aspects of it. You see bad guys using, and guys here is a generic term, okay, gender neutral term. Bad guys using AI to generate attacks. And I kind of joke about dumb blondes can be hackers now because of AI. So the attackers are being advantaged. And the defenders, I'm sure there are good uses for defenders. Just for example, think about people in threat intel. How do you parse through all that and figure out what is it I should really be worried about in my enterprise based on my usage? Or how do I figure out which are the most the things that I see, which are the things that should be most of concern? Maybe they can put things together so there's a pattern here that I might have missed or not have found. So I'm not saying it's bad, but just in general, when you step back on this, what I really would want is for, first of all, the people who are developing these to be honest about what it is good for, what it is not good for, and what the security risks are. Also, to really focus on how do we proactively mitigate those. A lot of people don't like the word guardrails, but back to the AI thing. Would you want agent A calling agent B, calling agent C, and you don't really know what went between them, and you don't really know with what privileges they did something, and you have no audit records? Does anybody think that's going to end well? Probably not. And particularly in a lot of these regulated industries, you would really like to know, okay, that I know that a transaction happened the way it was supposed to. It was not used for money laundering. So that gets back to the notion of explainable AI. I want to know what it did with what appropriate privileges and have appropriate records to make sure it did what it was supposed to do and didn't do what it wasn't supposed to do. And I don't think that's, being a blocker. I think that's being an enabler, because the more that people trust AI because people have explained what it does and they've thought about how it could be misused and they've tried to design that in, then you will have people using it, as opposed to, well, I'm not really sure about this. I don't really know what it does. And similarly, kind of last comment as I'm kind of rambling on, I know a lot of companies are saying to employees, we want you to use this. Just go use it. And again, some of the employers are finding it's creating more work for them. I have a very specific example if you're interested in it, because I've experienced that. And again, I'm not saying it's bad. It's that you want your employees to be successful. then help them be successful. Help them, give them the training they need on how to use this well. Give them, here's the things that we think it's best used for. If you want to, and if people are successful with it, plus then they're probably going to be more willing to use it, as opposed to, well, we're not really sure what it's good at, just go out there and tire kick it for a while, and then or demanding that people use it when they're not using it for the things that could really add value. They're just creating more work for people. Not what you want.
Yeah, and I think, some of that problem, I think, stems back to our ongoing referencing to Ethos. I read an article, must be about 6 months ago now, where some researchers were like, hey, we think we figured out why AI is hallucinating so much. And the reason was they were basically training it and saying you score points for giving an answer. You don't score points for not giving an answer. And therefore, it was trained to always say something instead of going, hey, I can't answer that. I need more information. Or, hey, that's outside of my scope. Or, hey, I'm not sure this is true. Instead, it was just encouraged to say something. And therefore, it really sort of, emphasized that, and amplified hallucinations even more so than any training data it has, which I think, causes problems. I think also, people don't, I think a lot of people are using AI thinking that it is deterministic, and without realizing just how probabilistic it is. And I've seen situations, and I've got a couple little side projects where I'm building stuff with AI, and you watch two agents talk to each other, and all of a sudden they're passing information that is like, one goes slightly off topic, and then the other one is responding even more slightly off topic. And I was like, okay, when you two talk, you have to give it this in this format. B, when you respond, you have to respond in this format with this topic. So even if something does go a little afield, it's at least tied back to that, and much easier to see when things start to drift. And that's even more amplified with just how fast, 6 months, a year ago, you didn't have the ability to just go to a website and run a query with agentic mode like you can with ChatGPT. So this stuff is moving so fast. And, I really feel for the security folks that are on the front line, because this is it reminds me of the 90s. I remember in the 90s connecting companies to the internet without a firewall. Something you would never think about doing. You never think about doing now, but things were changing so fast. I mean, I joined Applied Materials, for example, in the early 90s. Everything was dumb terminals and mux ports. To 3 years later, when I left, we had fully run switched ports down to every desktop. Everybody had a Windows machine, 16,000 PCs that weren't there 3 years ago. And now it's like this stuff is moving so much faster. And, I really see people, really focused in just a narrow area, but not necessarily understanding the environment. I was training some consultants a few years ago, and I was talking about MX records and how they could be exploited. And I had a hand go up, and I was like, oh, what's the question? What's an MX record? And I'm like, these were supposed to be like advanced security consultants at one of the top 10 MSSPs asking me what an MX record was. And I'm like, I just made an assumption that people at this level should know how DNS works. But I asked, does anybody else? And about a quarter of the class raised their hand. So it really is scary, how much of that is going on. As you saw, oh, go ahead.
Oh, well, sorry for interrupting. I mean, that kind of gets back to, and I think this is generally true with some, it's true in a lot of areas of life, frankly. But you have some brilliant technologists or developers and actually brilliant ethical hackers. And not everybody can explain things to people who are not as technical in a way that they understand. Now, the hacking team was good at that. So even though I cannot hack my way out of a paper bag, okay, with a machete maybe, but they would do something very, in the weeds, and they would up level it to the point where I could understand how they did what they did, and enough to say, I get the importance of this. And it could also communicate it in a way that was helpful and not threatening. If you go into developers and say your code is rubbish, now you just lost the audience, right? And I've made that mistake myself in a different realm. But being able to say, here's the risk and here's why, here's the problem we found and why it matters. And that in general, I think would be really helpful to people. And it also helped more people understand the gravity of some of the things that they had missed. It wasn't, I'm not throwing you under the bus. I'm trying to explain, these hackers in a way that you can understand what the takeaways were. And in one case, there was a lot of briefings of other people, so they would all understand, here's the shift that you need to make, because here's how they did what they did after long, just like, the bad guy hackers do, long, persistent way of finding a way in, and the potential for compromising, and it was actually build systems. And what bad thing could happen there? She's after SolarWinds, right? So
Yeah.
it really helped. It really helped because part of that was, okay, what do we need to do differently at a more systemic level to mitigate against this type of threat? That's exactly the point of having some of these things. Or even if God forbid you have an incident or a breach or whatever, part of this, in fact, I just did a talk on this week, it was certainly stepping back and doing a post-mortem, but also as an industry, we should think about, and there are risks with this, probably some of them are legal, sharing with others in our profession, here's what happened to us and what we learned from what we're doing differently. Because the bad guys are sharing all that information, how they did do bad things, exploit code, all those things. So people who are defenders or experience these things, we need to be probably more transparent about, what are we doing differently? What do we learn? What are we going to do differently? How do we help other people who are in the trenches in another company learn from this? And if we do, it's not just sharing threat intel, it's experiences intel. Because that's another thing I loved about the Marines. They know who their heroes are. So the military, you do wargaming, and part of that is you study old battles. What happened here? How did somebody prevail? You learn from that because it is relevant. It's not always just about the equipment you're using. It's about some of the bigger lessons.
Yeah, and I think the military does some great training in terms of, get training people to be able to respond based on instinct, and this is how we react in this situation. I think a lot of companies, they don't have, for example, their incident response process documented. So when it happens, everybody's running around going, well, how do I act? What am I supposed to do? As opposed to, okay, this is happening. It's this type of attack. I'm supposed to respond in this way, which I think really makes it different. You know, I've got one final question for you, and then I'll leave it up to you in case you want to add anything more. But since leaving Oracle, you've stayed engaged with the security community, doing advisory roles, etc. With not just AI, but just how the security landscape is changing in general. What do you think the new skills and mindsets that CISOs and security teams are going to need to learn, new muscle memory that they're going to need to learn to succeed in how things are changing over sort of the next 5 years?
Oh, that's a great question. Actually, all your questions are very thoughtful, and I appreciate that. I do think AI is going to be part of this, because even if despite my concerns about it, I try to keep au courant with trends to understand what's happening, because it's it's not going to go away. So I think that is going to be part of it. But part of it gets back to how can people use it successfully from a business standpoint, meaning it is adding value, not creating more work for people, so that your talented employees can use it as the good tool it is and have higher value in their skills are used for higher value add activities. So it's basically doing a lot of the up and down lifting. And the other part of it is what are those security risks? So you can anticipate, yes, the technology is evolving. I get that. But another military analogy, when I went out, when I was in the Navy, none of us had ever fired a weapon. We went out on the range and we had such a good range master, Petty Officer Malott, who taught us all to fire, that even though we only did 2 rounds, 100% qualification, over 50% shot expert, because he was such a good instructor about, and also if you screw around with a live, you're off the range. So we knew what we could use it for, how to use it safely, and how to be, learn to be lethal, but not lethal against somebody we were on the range with. That's kind of the whole point here. If you want to use AI for good business reasons, you need to know what those security risks are. Hopefully some may be mitigated more systemically over time. So you can use it where it's going to be valuable and not use it to increase your attack surface just because it's a thing. It's a valuable thing. It can be used for good things. But the last thing you want to do is create more problems using it that really can't be mitigated when the bad guys you already know are using AI to try to break into the stuff faster and better. You want to be successful with AI, not, hey, oh, shoot, I just opened up every door in my house. Dang, I hate it when that happens.
Yeah, no, it's going to be interesting. And, I'm sure if we speak again in a year or even 6 months from now, things are going to be changing, quite a bit more, as people use AI more and more in their daily life. My wife, who's not a technologist, I'm amazed at some of the stuff she does pottery, so she's using AI to bounce glaze recipes off the AI to see if it can figure out how different chemicals will react. So it's going to be interesting to see how areas that wouldn't typically be using technology start to use AI, much like, in the early 90s, you started to see things pop up where there was, areas of the internet where you didn't have people using technology, and then all of a sudden there's a pottery forum over here or a gardening forum over there, helping people learn, and all the YouTube videos that people watch when they need to fix a leaky faucet. So it's been great chatting with you.
Yeah, you too. And thank you so much. I appreciate your thoughtful questions. And really, I just, we all want security to be better. My goal was always, I want a lot of people working in security to be bored. It'd be nice to be bored because you're not having all these attacks that are successful. So
yeah, I think anybody who's in security would probably echo that and say, yeah, I would love to be bored at work instead of working extra hours. But it has been great chatting with you.
Well, thank you, Brian.
I look forward to chatting again.
All right. Have a great one.
Thanks, Fran.
You bet. Bye-bye.